A Machiavellian teenage boy, for example, is a teenage boy who tries to seduce a girl and then sell them into human trafficking.
Oh, like
That's very
It's very
Machiavellian.
dark. Yeah, that's very dark.
Yeah.
So
if you're a teenager doing that, that's really bad.
And there's a lot of those.
Really?
There are those cases, yes.
Wow.
And they find like very good looking guys trying to seduce young girls and sell them, like it's like their hook. Sell them to human trafficking for money.
Welcome to Boundaries and Beyond, the podcast that empowers you to set boundaries and nurture self-care, as well as have happier, healthier relationships. I'm Jennifer, your co-host.
and I'm Dr. Pokerel, your other co-host, and joining us is Trinity, the real junkyard dog.
Say hello.
And sometimes Toby doesn't want to be left out, so
Yeah.
he's spread out in the front of us.
Yes. I hear the term boundaries thrown around a lot these days, but what does that term actually mean? We're here to clear all that up.
In every episode, we'll break it all down for you, share practical tips for building better boundaries so you can have healthier, happier, more balanced lives. And yes, we are that good.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you for joining us today. Are you worried about raising a psychopath or somebody on any of the dark triad, which is Machiavellianism, Narcissism, and Psychopathy? So today joining us is Ana Munguia, a licensed professional counselor, and she will help us get a little more nuanced into this subject. Very fascinating subject, apparently. We've got a lot of people looking into this. So, Ana, how about you introduce yourself?
Okay. Thank you for having me. And I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. I've been practicing in the States since 2006. But I started practicing in Mexico since 2001. And I have a licensure in psychology in Mexico and master's in psychotherapy, paired with other studies and with teenagers and children.
And that's part of what
psychotherapy.
we're going to focus on today is
Exactly.
children and teenagers.
And I've worked with teenagers and children for all these years, also with adults, and I do a lot of individual psychotherapy.
Part of the reason that this is a challenge is because the presentation can be a little bit different between teenagers and adults, at least in terms of the dark triad.
And what do you mean by presentation?
So that's how they manifest clinically. In other words, what kind of signs and symptoms they're going to show, and when they come and seek counseling, at least the parents bring them in for counseling, and often the issue is, Ana, I'm going to let you take that part over, is the psychopathy, because teenagers can appear to be psychopaths pretty much, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Actually, we can't diagnose any personality disorders at that age because they naturally have a lot of the traits. So psychopathy, narcissism, some teenagers are very self-centered, but it's natural and it's actually healthy because they need to start developing that sense of self and self-importance. So they focus a lot of them on themselves. Also, kids are very self-focused. So we have all those traits naturally in teenagers. And that's the tricky part, seeing if this is normal or if this is way too much. And we should worry about it, right?
Okay, so I guess that's part of the question that parents are going to have is this really a psychopath I need to worry about? Is this my child going to turn into Dexter, or am I dealing with normal teenager behavior? And same thing with the narcissism, because as you mentioned, teenagers, it takes a lot of energy to grow up, and teenagers often need that. I forget what you call it, but self-centeredness is important at that age, especially with young children. But they'll grow out of it, right? That's
Yes.
part of it. Okay, so before we move on, we have to have uh, Jennifer tell us what Trinity's wearing.
Well, this is a Laura Ashley lookalike. So again, another
What is Laura Ashley? I
Anna.
gotta
You
ask.
you know who Laura Ashley
Yes, it's a
is.
brand.
It's an old-fashioned brand, but it's known
Yes.
for the flowers and cotton dresses, very, very beautiful, flouncy spring dresses. So she's got her Laura Ashley look-alike summer dress on today, especially since we're embarking on summer and it's getting a little warmer out.
That dress
So
looks very narcissistic to me.
I don't think Trinity's a narcissist.
Ha. Okay. So let's move on. So Anna, you were talking about the difference between teens and adults and teenagers. Some of these traits might be normal. So what is the difference between a trait and a personality disorder?
Well, traits can be just signs that teenagers have. Like, for example, teenagers are going to tease each other here and there, and that's normal. And they try to look better than the other ones because for teenagers, their self-image is one of the most important things. They need to look good in front of friends. So that's basic normal teenage behavior. Now, when you're talking about not only teasing but cruelty, like being cruel, lacking empathy, putting people down relentlessly, that's different. And it's like it's consistent. Or using people versus, help me do my homework, or like maybe blackmailing someone into doing your homework and telling them I have a picture of you and I have this information of you and I'm gonna put it in social media to make you look bad. And there's, like manipulating people like that, that's Machiavellianism. So it's like the how often it happens, that's a red flag. Like if it's too much and too often, those are red flags.
And what is too much and too often? Because it's real easy to kind of delude yourself as a parent and say, oh, my child would never do that. And you hear about these parents on the news that they never could have seen that in their darling daughter or son. So what is too much?
Criminal behavior is too much. Or threatening a teacher with saying they're sexually harassing them when it's not true for a grade.
Mhm.
That's too much. That's like
So
criminal
blackmail.
behavior.
Blackmail
Blackmail.
is too much.
Blackmail is too much.
What
Um,
about cruelty to animals?
yes. So you're going actually into an actual diagnosis that is from the DSM that is typically diagnosed before developing personality disorder, which is conduct disorder, and is
Hmm.
characterized by cruelty to animal or people. That's when you see that they're killing animals, that they like to see them suffer, that they enjoy suffering. That's not normal behavior.
Hmm. Okay.
Like in teenagers, that's not normal. Mhm.
Now I'm 57, and over the years I've seen people do things like throw a cat down the stairs, or they're mad at their dog so they throw it in the pool, or you hear of a kid in the classroom that is shot at a cow with a BB gun. And when I'd hear these stories, I would be shocked and appalled. But then, knowing these kids later in life as adults, they turned out normal. how
Mhm.
how do you know that that's just typical, being a bad teenager versus they're going to turn out into a
You
bad
have
adult?
to you have to see the intention here. Like, is this maybe an impulsive teenager who is just exploring Or is this like really wanting to see the suffering?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or
That's
they lost their
different.
temper or something like that versus,
Impulsivity.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
versus they're routinely picking on the dog and torturing it and hurting it, I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And hurting peers too, or
Pierce.
manipulating peers as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
Or like there's been, I don't know, sometimes in the news, kids who tell each other to kill themselves, and if there's actually a suicide, they even make fun of it. Or they
Yeah.
go ahead and start bullying the best
Yeah.
friend, and saying, why don't you kill yourself too? That's not like, that's a lack of
That's not normal.
empathy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
complete lack of empathy and a complete lack of connection
Hmm.
with others.
Okay, so we're talking about red flags then, and the so what are there are some examples that help us in social media or in the arts that can help us. So as you were talking about the bullying part, I was thinking of a very popular show, Mean Girls.
I was thinking about that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Mean Girls is a very good example of the Machiavellism and the narcissism, and
Hmm.
the narcissism's very, very high
Yeah.
on that show. And what about do you, in terms of psychopathy, what I think you've mentioned to me before, the character in Girl Interrupted. I forget her
Yes.
name.
Yeah, the character that plays it, that Angelina Jolie plays, Lisa, I think it was. She's a psychopath in that show, and there's a scene actually where she's talking to a girl who had eating disorders, and she starts talking about how her dad is abusing her sexually, and the girl ends up killing herself, and there's no connection whatsoever. She talks to her that night like relentlessly. She starts talking to her about how she is abused by her dad, and that and starts insulting her. And then the girl goes to her room and then kills herself, and the next day they found her hanging
Hmm.
in the bathroom. And she's like, oh well, move on. And no connection, no guilt, nothing.
No, actually, if I remember correctly, she said, "What an idiot." Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
I
So
thought she was diagnosed with borderline personality.
No, that's Winona Ryder. She's diagnosed, and when she sees that, she puts her, like, she just stops following Lisa, because psychopaths can be very good leaders, and that's the
Yeah.
scary part, that
Yeah.
they can control people, and they like that control. They really like that control, but they're impulsive.
and just to clarify, we're not saying Winona Ryder was diagnosed. We're talking about the
No, no,
character
no.
she
The
played. Yeah.
character she played, I just don't remember the name of the character.
Yeah. I just want to
Okay.
make sure the algorithm doesn't pick that up and
Yes,
we get in
yes.
trouble.
Yeah, no, 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 no. Not
Yeah.
Winona.
No.
Just the character she plays is diagnosed with borderline personality.
Okay.
So those are all good examples of psychopathy and narcissism and Machiavellism in women. What do we see in as far as
Teenagers.
teenage boys are
Let me
concerned?
let me tell you something before we move on. Machiavellianism is not precisely a diagnosis. It's a trait.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Machiavellians, as opposed to narcissists, they don't need the admiration. They don't need the prize. They can be behind closed doors as long as they can manipulate people and take advantage of people. They're good.
Mhm.
Okay.
They don't
So they
need
don't,
that admiration.
right. So when you say the prize, you mean admiration.
Admiration, and people telling them how wonderful they are, because with narcissism there's a deep emotional wound that makes them feel very insecure, so they overcompensate that,
So
and
they
they need the
need,
admiration. Yes.
yeah, they need the attention versus Machiavellians don't need the attention. They can be
No.
the puppet master, in other words.
Yes.
Okay.
A Machiavellian teenage boy, for example, is the teenage boy who tries to seduce a girl and then sell them into human trafficking. Yeah.
if you're a teenager doing that, that's really bad.
And there's a lot of those. There
Really?
are those cases, yes.
Wow.
And
Wow.
they find like very good looking guys trying to seduce young girls and sell them, like it's like their hook.
Wow. So that's a big thing in human trafficking. They get the teenage hook that will, oh, come to think of it, there was, I'm trying to think, the clown killer, the serial killer, he would get teenage boys, like he would get one teenage boy that would lure in another teenage boy.
You're talking about
John Wayne
John Wayne
Gacy.
Gacy, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. From
Okay.
my home state, Iowa.
Okay, so that's interesting. I didn't know that about Gacy, but um so I was thinking about the psychological profile of the kids in the Breakfast Club. So it's a classic. Um, if you're too young and you haven't seen it, you really should see it because a very um, one of John Hughes' best films. Actually, I think it was probably the only really good one. But I was going through this the diagnosis of the narcissist would be the football player or the athlete. He wasn't a football player; he was a wrestler. The Emilio Estevez was playing that role, and he engaged in bullying behavior, and that's one of the reasons he was in detention. And then the 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 rebel, I forget who the actor is.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, he seems more psychopathic than the rest of the group. So then the other boy, the nerd, was in there because he had brought a flare gun to school. And I think in a way uh, he was trying to disrupt the class because he didn't want to get an F. So that's manipulation, is manipulating the system.
Yeah.
But I think, what do you think about that, Anna?
I mean, what I remember about the movie, I remember this conversation between them. There's a point in the movie where they're talking, and the guy who was like goth, like a little like more rebellious, I don't remember his name.
That
Uh
was Judd Nelson's character.
yes.
Yeah, he was the rebel.
Mhm.
He was
Yes,
the
the
rebel. He was
rebel.
an outcast.
Yeah.
He was an outcast, and he had no empathy. Like he would talk to them so cruel, like in a very cruel way. And I remember that I don't remember any of the names, but the other character, the girl who's like
Molly Ringwald, she played
Molly
Claire.
starts telling him to stop,
Mhm.
and she gets really mad at him. And he you see a lot of behaviors here that are, yes, they are traits. I'm not sure. And like I said, I saw the movie last time. I recently saw it, maybe a year ago. Um, and but many of these behaviors could have been like, yes, some
Normal.
teenagers struggle more than others. So I don't want to say fully normal, but yes,
Mhm.
from what I remember, I would have to like sit and
Oh,
see it again to
I
analyze it.
remember pointing to every single one of those characters and going, "Oh, that was so and so, and that was so and
Yeah,
so, and that,"
it's a very
and
good movie.
even in our friend group, we could spot those traits in each other, and
Yeah.
so in all of the people that I know in my high school, none of them grew up to be like criminals that I know of, or those people that I felt like were perfect, like examples of that archetype.
Yeah.
Trinity's licking me, but yeah. So I don't think that that would be a typical, I think, teenager behavior that would look scary, but is that person really going to grow up to be a criminal or a serious problem when they're an adult? Can they reform?
Well, something I tell parents all the time is most of the times they're gonna grow out of it and they'll be fine most of the times. Like unless you see like conduct disorder kind of behaviors or manipulation, like severe manipulation, or intentionally like controlling people and trying to get money out of it, or like very severe behaviors normally are more like red flags. And even though you have to see if there is a comorbidity there that's causing those behaviors. So
Yeah.
I would normally recommend like an evaluation to see maybe there's ADHD, anxiety, depression,
Mhm.
something else going on that you have to address.
Yeah.
Anna, you were talking about what were the things? The frequency, the intensity, the
Mm-hmm.
consequences. There was something else you said.
Yeah, it
Um,
was okay.
uh,
Give me a moment here to check it out because yeah, I have it. It's frequency, intensity, duration, and impact.
Duration. Okay.
Yes.
So essentially, if they grow out of it, is the kind of stuff that you're probably okay. But
Yeah.
as Jennifer was describing these things, the frequency is like they're constantly in trouble. The duration is being going on. So what's duration too long in this age group? Because in retrospect, teenagers are 12 to 18.
Yeah.
That's only 6 years. The older we
Mm-hmm.
get, the less that seems to be a long period of time. And
Well, no, that like we're talking about phases. During teenagehood, you're gonna have phases in which they start acting out. So you can have something lasting a few days or a few weeks versus 6 months, for example.
okay, so 6 months
So
would be too long.
it would be like, okay, we may have a problem here. Let's keep an eye on it, because that's too much. So that's the duration. Normally you have them being, for example, irritable or having a phase of wanting to cheat in the test, getting away with things. That's normal in teenagers. They want to get away with things. They want to test the boundaries. They want to break rules. So those are normal things. But when you have it for too long and having consequences that are too serious,
Mhm.
then that's different.
So if this is
So,
seriously affecting their grades, their friendships, their
mm-hmm,
interactions with other adults,
mm-hmm,
like they're losing friends over it, or they're losing, they just always seem to be getting bad grades. They're failing the year uh,
mm-hmm.
and flunking out the year. Those kind of things, that those are the red flags, or would you say?
Yeah, that's the impact,
Okay,
the
the
level
impact.
of impact. Like if they end up going to jail,
Yeah. Oh,
that's an
yeah.
impact. That's a big
Juvie.
impact. And yeah, to juvie. So that's an impact. So we're talking frequency, intensity, duration, and impact. Those are the
Yeah.
four areas that you have to look at.
Or
And
expelled, or yeah.
mm-hmm,
Hmm.
exactly. So expelled is, yes, it's an impact, but it's not the highest. But jail
Yeah,
or,
that's a
you
major
know,
problem. Yeah.
exactly. Or fully running away from home, ending up in the streets, like that's the impact to your life that is very severe. Or not having friends at all because you take advantage of people so much and manipulate so much that people don't want to talk to you anymore. Those are red flags that are more severe.
So just to review, Anna, the frequency, intensity, duration, and impact, and you mentioned jail
Mm-hmm.
or juvie or whatever. Being in trouble with the law, I think it's more because they don't have
Mm-hmm.
to go to jail to get in trouble with the law, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
So if they keep getting tickets, that may be a sign that there might be risk-taking behavior. We mentioned drugs, which could be another risk-taking behavior, right?
Yes.
Uh, Although testing might be normal, but you got to worry about doing it too often. And
Mm-hmm.
so what do you, on that note, because a lot of parents often we hear, well, I did drugs when I was in school. I can't say anything to my child because I did drugs. I can't tell them anything about doing drugs. How do you handle those parents when they
I
tell you
mean,
that?
we were going to try because you did drugs when you were a teenager, you know how dangerous it can get and how they can hook with the drugs and not get out of it that easily. So then we have another problem that is the drug problem. So there are rules.
And then, so one of the things about being in jail or in trouble with the law, when would a parent should be concerned that they may be dealing with an antisocial? Now, you said we can't diagnose them personality disorders as teenagers, but
Yeah.
there may be early signs that you're dealing with either oppositional defiant disorder
Or conduct
and
disorder.
or conduct disorder. And those are the
Mm-hmm.
two main ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as
Yeah.
that's concerned.
Yeah.
So when should parents be concerned about something like that?
When you're seeing cruelty to animals, for example, cruelty to peers, when they are breaking rules relentlessly, lack of empathy, but like because teenagers lack empathy many times because they're still developing. But it's like excessive lack of empathy, like
Mhm.
towards peers, towards family members, cruelty, the way they talk to people, the way they talk to their family. Even sometimes, and I've seen this, teenagers that have full control of the house because they become violent.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that's not normal.
And the
Mm-mm.
parents let them do whatever they want just to avoid the, is that what you
So
mean?
I've had cases in which it's a single mom and the teenager is old enough to intimidate the mom or the grandma, and
Scary.
then and they can't, they don't know what to do because they're scared of them.
What do they do then? How do they handle it?
You call the police
Mhm.
if
And
they
they're
become
afraid to call the
violent,
police too,
and
right?
they're afraid to call the police. So you have to call the police and let them handle it. Especially if they're minors, it's not going to stay in the record, but they have to know there are consequences.
Yeah. So, I mean, you hear those cases escalating and you just want to shake that parent, like, why didn't you step in? But if they don't step in now, that teenager is going to become an adult and they didn't have boundaries as a teenager. So, guess where that's going to go when they're an adult, right?
Yes, and we're already talking about one of the risk factors, which is
Mhm.
lack of boundaries at
Mhm.
home and lack of clear boundaries is that's one of them. And the problem is the consequences as they grow older are going to be
Mhm.
worse.
Yeah.
So having the police come in and take you for a night or so without it staying in your record because you're still too young, that's not such a bad consequence. But if you're older, you might go to prison for sure, and you're going to stay there
Mhm.
for a while, and
Yeah.
it's going to stay in
Yeah.
your record, and you're going to have a criminal record. So that's that's a more serious consequence. So it's better if they learn to deal with the real life consequences
I
at a
remember
young age.
before reality shows were a thing, I think this was the 80s or maybe the 90s. There was a show called Scared Straight. And they took these teenagers and they filmed them. You know, they were these at-risk teenagers, and they would take them, have them spend the night in jail next to,
Hmm.
real criminals that were
Yeah.
screaming at them and calling them names, and but it really a lot of these kids, they'd interview them later and they'd say, yeah, that scared me enough to where I got back on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
So I don't know why parents have to protect their kids so much these days, or they're afraid to let those major consequences happen naturally.
Yeah, because they're
It
afraid they're going to hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
it
I
is a
think that's part of them.
natural, yeah, it's part of it, but it is a natural impulse to want to protect your children from harm, but you have to protect yourself too.
Yeah.
And you want to teach them that there are natural consequences for their behaviors because they are going to have them as adults. If they are adults and they treat someone like that and that person calls the police, they're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
It's not going to be juvie, it's not going to be one night.
Yeah.
It's going to be like longer term. But we have another factor sometimes, which is that, and that's a risk factor too, which is when they come from families where there's violence. So it becomes normal. It's normalized in the family that they act that way because that's how everybody acts in the family. So
Yeah.
that's another factor that can be of risk with these
So
teenagers.
in that case, if you're living with a violent spouse, what would you advise that parent?
They need family therapy. I've worked with some families in which I've had to say, you want to change, you have to start with yourself.
Mhm. And what if
Because
the What if you can't get the partner to come in?
Then the prognosis, well, no, if you can't get the parent to come in, like if it depends on the situation, like if there's actual abuse to the minor, because sometimes minors, if they're abused, they become abusive. So it becomes like a chain. So
Yeah.
we have another factor there that is not necessarily the dark triad, but it can turn into it.
Hmm.
Because if one child is psychologically abused, for example, and they go to school and they become bullies, they're just repeating what they see at home.
Yeah. Hmm.
They're doing
It's
the same
normal.
thing. It's normal for them, and it's so enraging for the minor that they have to take it out on someone that they feel weaker, because
Yeah.
at home they are the weakest one, or one of the weakest, because they can bully their sibling, their younger
Yeah.
sibling, but they go to school and bully someone who they feel is more vulnerable because they're
Yeah.
repeating the same pattern.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it doesn't change at home, then that's that's more complicated. Now, if the child is being abused, it can be reported to CPS.
Okay, so Anna, so we're talking about the risk factors. You already went over the family history,
Mm-hmm.
families that have no boundaries or don't enforce their boundaries. That's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Modeling where it's acceptable to behave in those ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what other risk factors are there? I mean, I assume childhood trauma has something to play here. You
Childhood
mentioned
trauma,
abuse. Any other types of
either
trauma?
physical, psychological, sexual abuse, all of those are factors. Also, parents with personality disorders, that's also a risk factor, or with history of psychopathy, Machiavellianism, or narcissistic behaviors. So a history of that at home, that's another risk factor. Um, Another one, well, if we go to psychopathy, there's a biological component, but obviously you can have the traits, you can have um the tendency, but if you grow up in a house that is more like nurturing, you might not develop all those traits, or you might try um to function better. But if you grow up in a household where there's abuse, then you're more likely to develop those traits.
By the way, the bird behind you, Jennifer, is getting really loud.
Oh, okay.
That it's okay. It's not. It's just. It actually sounds beautiful. Okay, what about you mentioned if there's no and I think this was a big big point that you made is that a single mother and the child and the boy, a teenage
Mm-hmm.
boy gets violent and they can't control them. So absence of a father at home is
Yes.
another major problem or major
Mm-hmm.
risk factor, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
It could be a risk factor. Mm-hmm.
and what about peers?
Yeah, yeah, that's another risk factor that I was going to mention, peer influence. And many times it's paired with other situations, like, for example, not feeling connected with your family, not feeling that you belong, because that makes you at more risk to join a gang, for example. And if you join a gang, the gangs are going to tell you they're going to be your family, they're going to protect you, come and join us. And if you lack that sense of belonging at home, then you're going to join the gang because you feel protected by them.
Yeah.
So would that be the scapegoat, the kids that are scapegoated at home?
It could be, or it could be a household where there's neglect. So neglect at home also can trigger that. Like sometimes kids live at homes, and I've seen this, where there's not even food in the refrigerator. Like the parents are never there and they're always alone. That puts you at more risk to join a gang, for example, or join the the wrong crowd. And
Yeah.
peer influence is important too.
Hmm. Can a normal teenager just get caught up in the wrong crowd, or is it usually the other way around that that a normal teenager is insulated from that, or
No,
is
they
there a
could.
spectrum?
They could, because many times they just want to be accepted, and they could join the wrong crowd if they feel accepted by them. It's so
Mhm.
important for teenagers to have acceptance and look good in front of the rest, that sometimes they want to look like the rebellious bad one,
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and if, especially if it's socially accepted with the peers.
I'll never forget a situation in my middle school where there was this little girl, and I don't know if she had some skin disorder or whatever, but she had sores all over her face, and it seemed like the entire school, like it started out with a few teenagers that just started picking on her, and then before you knew it, it was like most of the schoolyard, and I just remember feeling horrified by how it grew into kind of this mob mentality sort of thing. But I can't imagine all of those kids in the schoolyard were, uh, you know, it's almost like it just took over like a virus. Is that a thing?
Yes.
It is.
Yes, because it becomes like it's either, the kids in power,
Mhm.
you don't want to be bullied, so you better bully, because if not, you're going to be treated that way. So they start joining the ones that look cool, you know?
Oh,
And they
yeah,
start doing what the cool kids do, and they start doing what is acceptable, or what is going to put them in a better position socially, because
yeah.
social status for teenagers is very important. I don't know if you remember, you were talking about Mean Girls before, where she says that's social suicide. Something that they were saying, that's social suicide, and that's huge for teenagers.
Yeah,
It's like you're
yeah.
not going to do anything that's not going to be accepted by
By
peers.
the
I mean,
way, I don't think it's a coincidence that in Mean Girls there were three of them, of the
Oh, yes.
plastics. So the dark triad walking. So it's a personalization of the dark triad. Anyway,
yeah. I just remember that scene, and I'd always felt terrible about myself for not acting up, but that makes sense, or not speaking up, but that's the perfect word, social suicide.
Yes. Mm.
I guess, back then, and I was brand new. I didn't know anybody at the school, so I was just
Yeah.
I guess I can feel a little bit better that I didn't want to make social suicide. I'm older now.
Yeah.
I would do that now, but that as a
How many
kid,
times do you tell a teenager, why didn't you
yeah,
do this or that? Or why didn't you say this? And they're like,
yeah,
I'm 16. What
I
do you want me to say?
know.
We don't do that. I'm in high school. We
I
don't
know,
do
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. It's so
yeah,
important for them. It's like
yeah,
it becomes, before it was the parents and the family. But as
mhm,
they grow older and become teenagers, all that emotional charge is transferred to peers. So they want to be accepted and admired by peers. That's the narcissistic part that is
yeah.
normal in teenagers. And
They, yeah,
it can even help them become leaders and go for leader positions, because they want to be admired by peers, but then they start exploring, and that can be a very good thing for the future.
yeah. Hmm. Interesting.
okay. So I was looking into uh, some of the other risk factors. So social isolation
Hmm.
is also another one.
Yeah.
Um, and we briefly talked about not belonging within the family. Does it include I mean, I have to assume that it includes the peer group as well, getting
Yeah.
isolated from the peer group.
That's a risk factor. Like, if you start seeing a teenager who isolates, that can be a red flag. It could be depression too. You need to know where it's coming from. Like, when you have risk factors, you have to have other traits too. Like, you have to see the whole, because they can isolate socially because they're depressed, or because they don't feel accepted, or because they don't know how to fit in, or because they're in the spectrum. Sometimes they're in the spectrum and they don't need that that social feedback. Some kids feel more comfortable being alone, but normally normally teenagers want to be with peers. And social isolation could be one. Like even the Machiavellianism has to do, like they want to have control, but they don't need to have friends. They can be making friends just for social status. They can have a girlfriend for social status because they want to be popular and the girl's popular, but they don't care about her. Or they can be friends with someone just to have them do their homework for them
Mm,
because they're manipulator. They're manipulators. They're great
mm.
manipulators. But yeah, isolation is one of the other red flags that we can see.
Now, it seems that kids are a lot more isolated than they used to be because number one, parents are afraid to let their kids go out and play and possibly get abducted. Um, there's all kinds of fears these days that heighten parents need to keep their or feel like they have to keep their kids indoors and sheltered. And then kids end up playing video games all day long. So, but then you hear, well, I'm playing with my friends
Mhm.
on the video game. Is what? Tell me more about that.
I mean, that's their way of socializing now. They stay indoors, but they're like, for example, all day long, they can be playing video games with their friends, like connecting the call, or they can be FaceTiming all day long in group chats or in group calls.
Mhm.
So that's not isolation.
Okay, all
Those
right.
kids are not isolated. They are
But
interacting with their friends.
the ones playing video games alone, watching
That's
TikTok
that's
alone.
different.
Hmm.
And like I said, it could be a different reason.
Yeah.
So every case is different and you have to look for several factors combined. Like if
Hmm.
you have the isolated kid who's playing video games all day long, who's really aggressive, who manipulates people, who has no empathy for others, who goes and kills the dog or tortures the animals, then yeah, you're having a lot of factors. Is like, okay, now you have a red flag. You
Yeah.
know, it's not
So
one factor.
it's a cluster of factors.
Yes,
Hmm.
exactly.
Okay, so I was looking up also some of the uh, neurophysiologic components of it. So one of the interesting things is psychopathy has probably the strongest genetic
Hmm.
component, right?
Yes.
Trinity? Trinity's commenting on
Yeah,
that.
Trinity is
So,
agreed.
Yes, you
yes.
heard your
So,
name.
but one of the interesting things thought, and we were discussing this before, is the amygdala is smaller
Yes.
in in these individuals. So the amygdala is associated with emotional controller, or that's not exactly right, but the emotional processing. And with a smaller amygdala, it's like less empathy, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, and that's also associated with memory. The amygdala is also associated with memory processing. So, do you have any comments about any of those other physiologic aspects, Anna?
Well, something about the amygdala. The amygdala is also associated with anxiety and with the fight or flight response. And when you can manipulate people and not have like any physical reaction, anything, just, control your environment, treat people badly, explode on people, uh, and start insulting, being aggressive, there's
They're
no
not afraid of.
anxiety. Anxiety is not necessarily bad unless it's an anxiety disorder. Then it
Mhm.
becomes something that you need to control, that you need to reduce. But anxiety helps us first, protects us from danger. We don't go and have reckless behaviors like sociopaths or psychopaths. Uh, and they have a smaller amygdala, so they don't have those reactions. They don't have those rushes.
Do these
Uh,
kids take a lot more risks, like driving while drunk and, driving fast, jumping off of high places,
They're
stuff like that?
extremely impulsive, yes.
Okay.
They are more impulsive and they have more reckless behaviors that get them in trouble with the law,
Hmm.
for example.
Hmm.
One more neurobiological factor that I wanted to point out is there are imbalances in serotonin, dopamine, and testosterone. Yes, that's in especially psychopathy.
Oh, okay. And how does that affect them? Like,
They become more impulsive, more aggressive. They can become there's the mood is not regulated
mhm.
in those factors.
So can you regulate that with medicine?
Many times you can. Sometimes you can.
sometimes.
Sometimes, not always.
Okay, so as far as the dopamine, I'll just point out that that's the reward system. So they're
Hmm.
probably looking to constantly get that reward from dopamine. And if they have dysregulation of serotonin, then they can have more, they're more prone to the negative emotions. Um, and the testosterone being a little bit on the higher side can result in that aggressiveness. Uh, so those are the areas where there might be dysfunction. Now, are those related to the environment or those genetic? We don't really know, do we, Anna? Do you know if
We don't
there's
really know. We do know that in psychopathy, we have more biological components. You still can do like some things when they're younger and some interventions, but it's more neurobiological.
okay? So I actually had some statistics here because the psychopathy is the inheritance is upwards of 50%. Um, the narcissism is about 20 to 50%, but the Machiavellianism is a little bit more, that's more of a learned behavior. So it's not
Machiavellianism is in the middle of those.
okay, okay.
It's like in the middle between psychopathy and narcissism.
In
Narcissism is
terms
the
of
most.
inheritance, you mean?
Hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Which I don't know
And
how much is learned if there are parents who have psychopathic behaviors themselves, or who are violent. I don't know how much it's learned.
okay, so that would be interesting. The emotional neglect and narcissism. What do you have any comments about children who are emotionally neglected and the risk of developing narcissism?
The thing is, narcissism has to do with a lack of mirrorings, according to certain theories. The mirroring is when the mom has a child, a very young child, and it's kind of like the child's mirror. You see that child as, the most important thing in your life. You love your children, and when you look at him or her, it's like you're reflecting that love and that admiration, and he's, like grandiose.
Hmm.
Okay. When that is affected because of any reason, the mom was depressed, the mom couldn't give it, the mom didn't want the child, it was just neglectful, then that's when you have like a narcissistic wound in that
Mm.
child.
Hmm.
And it starts developing this need to compensate that lack of that part that is like the admiration, like that part of mirroring that
Hmm.
you need
Mhm.
when you're starting to grow up.
Hmm.
And as they grow older, they start trying to compensate it more and more. The earlier the lack of mirroring, the more intense the narcissistic wound.
Mm.
In a way, it could be a mother, it could be a rescuing figure. It can be, someone important in the child's life. Because if the mother's not there, you can have a rescuing figure. Normally, the mom is the one that gives that to the child. But if you have a good father, a grandma, an aunt, someone who took care of that child, then it could be that person.
That causes me to think about children that have been adopted. Are they at severe risk for narcissism, or or can you make a difference as that adoptive family by kind of really, really focusing on mirroring that child, making that a point?
It depends. Honestly, I haven't seen any research. Like, I don't have any research in my mind about that. From what I've seen in practice, I've seen a lot of kids who come from a very neglectful background and they are adopted and parents try to compensate. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Like no matter how much they try, sometimes it hasn't been successful and some other times it is. So it's because kids are very resilient.
Yeah.
So that's something I notice in practice that when you treat a child, they get over things faster than adults because with adults you have to go back to treat all the trauma for years, like
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
And with a child, you're right there. I like it's like maybe a couple of years ago or 3 years ago. So they are very resilient. But it depends on the situation, really.
Okay, why don't we talk a little bit about we've talked a lot about risk factors and red flags and comparing different movies like The Breakfast Club and Mean Girls. Uh, so what can parents do about this? So one of the things we talk about is boundaries, the importance of setting boundaries. And when parents are able to model healthy boundaries, the kids can learn that and consequences. So what are some of the other things that parents can do? What about recognition? Does early recognition make a difference here?
Yes. Like I would say you can reduce like if you're seeing these traits in your child, even if they're mild, just start working on it. And as you can do, like, depending on how severe, you can do therapy, you can do family therapy if it's necessary, but also at home, you can start setting clear boundaries and favor your relationship. Like, um, fighting with your child's not going to help you that much. It's going to damage the relationship. They're going to avoid you more and they're going to go and talk to their not very healthy friendships probably and
Like
rely on
gangs?
them. The gangs. And so you want to have a good relationship with your child and you want to give them a lot of positive feedback. So, for example, and I sometimes what happens to parents is they're so mad at the child for how they're behaving that they can't see anything positive anymore.
Mhm.
So when they do something good, they just focus on the bad. I've had to work with parents on what's being good. And they're like, no, but they're doing this and this and this, and everything's bad. And I'm like, no, no, no. What's good? Like, try to see the positive. It's impossible that everything is wrong. Like that's what we call cognitive distortion in psychology, which is you are extremifying. You're seeing things in black or white. It's like all good or all bad. You have to look at the good and let them know you see it. That's one.
Wow. That I want to stop you there because that really works. The last podcast you told me, rather than focusing on the bad grades with my son, focus on what's good. And so we don't focus on the other grades. When he makes an A, it's like, wow, aren't you excited about that? You know, if there's some other grades, he's been actually improving by the month. Every month it's even higher. I don't know if it's because of that or it's maturing or it's all of that,
Yeah.
but
No, it does
yeah.
work. Like if you
Hmm.
focus on the positive and stop nagging about the negative,
Yeah.
it does help. I
Hmm.
remember I was in a program that was for teenagers that were out of control. That was years ago. But we
Yeah.
were working with the kind of teenagers that we're talking about. They
Yeah.
were swearing at the parents, sometimes single moms or, mom and grandma. And the
Yeah.
teenager who was getting older and was getting stronger and taller and it was so hard to control and they were just controlling the household
Mm.
because they were afraid of them. And something that was very powerful, it was like leaving them a note on their pillow because sometimes parents are so mad that they can't say it yet. because they're not ready. You have to work with the family too. And telling them, okay, just leave a note saying, I noticed that you picked up your plate today. Thank you so much. I love you. And leave it on top of their pillow.
Hmm.
And when they go to bed, they see it. And I would prepare the parents like they might just throw it away in front of you. Like they are not necessarily going to be thankful for it. So, because that really makes parents back off and say, no, this is not working. No,
Yeah.
just keep doing it. And then
Yeah.
at some point, teenagers were waiting for it and the relationship would start improving.
Oh,
It was
wow.
so powerful that
Wow.
I was shocked because these were teenagers that were like bad. Like they were
Wow.
very misbehaving. Like they were skipping school, they were doing drugs or, you know, delinquent behaviors or like any kind of behaviors you can imagine.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to see how they would start transforming when they were getting positive feedback from the parents and telling them, I love you, I'm proud of you
Yeah.
because you did this thing right. And
Wow. That's
it was like
powerful.
a minor thing,
Yeah.
but they were like, and they were all day trying
Yeah.
to find the good thing that they did because they couldn't find it.
It
They,
becomes like an Easter egg hunt.
yes. It was
Yeah.
like trying to figure out, okay, what did he do good? Because everything was
Yeah.
bad. And maybe 2 times a week or
Yeah.
3 times a week. And then you start doing it more. And at the beginning, they're going to be rejectful because they don't want to have, you know, their feelings hurt sometimes because
Yeah.
sometimes it's, you know, most of the times it's not going to be psychopathy. So
Uh,
you have to, you know, try to get closer to them. And especially they are still developing. So you
Yeah.
want to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
There's still hope. And
Yes, there's still hope. That's a great tip. That even works with employees, by the way.
yes, we all work with that. The
Yeah.
more positive you are
Mhm.
with, you know, your feedback, the better.
Yeah.
Now that is paired with writing down the rules.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so you can create a contract, very detailed one, especially with teens like this. You create a contract and you focus on one behavior at a time.
Okay.
So you're going to say, for example, okay, so I have all these complaints as a list. Pick the most important one
Mhm.
and start
Mhm.
with that.
So you
You
don't
don't
want
want
to
to,
overwhelm them with
no,
a laundry list.
you don't want to change all the behaviors all at once
Yeah. Okay.
because then it's going to be too much
Yeah.
and you're not going to accomplish anything.
Mhm.
And the expectations are going to be unrealistic. So
Yeah.
you start
Yeah.
with one and then try to not pay attention to the rest. Like I remember sometimes it was like, for example, okay, let's focus on disrespect. These were kids that were swearing at the parents, that were
Mhm.
terribly disrespectful. So let's focus on disrespect. And they were like, what about the room? They're not
Yeah.
cleaning the room. And I was like, okay, just close the door. Let's focus on disrespect for now.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
will go with the room. So,
Yes. Yeah.
and sometimes it comes with it. Like
Mhm.
as you improve your relationship, they start doing other things to please you.
Yeah.
So,
It just all falls in line eventually.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, these teenagers, when with these kind of behaviors, like most of them are great lawyers, but these are like even better because they try
You
to
mean
tell
they
you,
they argue quite really well? Is that what you
yes,
mean?
they argue really well and they try to tweak your rule. Like, for
Uh-huh.
example, if you say you're being disrespectful, no, I wasn't. Yes, you were. No, I wasn't disrespectful.
Gaslighting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
total gaslighting. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, that's not disrespectful. I'm just telling you the truth. And it's so you have to. So you write down what they're doing that is disrespectful.
Yeah.
Okay, rolling your eyes, swearing, and anything that I consider disrespectful. You know, like you have to write it down as a contract as if you were a lawyer.
And
Uh,
that's hard to do for a lot of people because, and I noticed this with employees, they would come and complain to me, well, she's so mean and disrespectful. Okay, well, tell me what because if I tell her she's mean and disrespectful, she's going to say no, she wasn't. So tell me, well, she was slamming doors and huffing and puffing. Okay, or she was she threw a clipboard down on my desk and threw her hands up in the air. A lot of times it's the body language. Like they can say something that sounds totally normal if you had it in a text message, but the
Mm-hmm.
body language tells you they're angry, they're raging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you write it down.
Yeah.
Throwing your
Yeah.
hands up in the air,
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we have to be careful with the walk away
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
sometimes it's about family dynamics.
Mhm.
Sometimes a teenager wants to walk away because they're getting mad and they don't want to be disrespectful. So that needs to be discussed. And I teach parents to walk away from the situation as well.
Yeah.
Because some
Okay.
parents don't know when to stop.
Yeah.
And it's
'Cause
not the right
anything
time
that
to talk. Mm-hmm.
anything that comes out of their mouth is going to be awful. So
Mm-hmm.
it's better just to walk away, even though that looks disrespectful. Okay.
Yeah. And so
That makes
you
sense.
can agree to, to saying something, hey, I need to walk away right now. I'm getting mad and I don't want to be disrespectful. That's
Mhm.
valid.
Mhm.
Because, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's about button pushing and about bad habits in the family where parents are used to just, staying there and arguing. You
Mhm.
don't want to stay there and argue. If they're being
Yeah.
disrespectful, you have to learn to walk away
Yeah.
and not, keep pushing each other's buttons. Because many times the teenager knows what your buttons are and you know what their buttons are. So it's like constant button pushing.
Yeah.
And then they
Yeah.
become disrespectful. So sometimes it's a matter of family dynamic.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's where family therapy sometimes is helpful too.
Okay, Anna, I was about to say, none of what you're saying is particularly intuitive for parents. A lot of this stuff seems to be things that they have to learn in some kind of parenting class,
Yep.
therapy. You mentioned family therapy, which is, I'm a big advocate of family therapy. Um, but I just want to make the point here is that this really sounds like that they have to seek help. And
Most of the time.
teenagers, I've often said it's more difficult to handle teenagers because they're stronger. They can walk away. They can run away, etc. At least
Yeah.
a small child, you can pick them up and put them in the room, but a teenager is different. They can
Yeah.
climb out the window.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so this all sounds like there's a learning curve, and
Yeah.
you can make that learning curve a little bit steeper if you get the right help. In other words, don't wait is what I'm getting at, and
Yeah.
don't be scared to seek help.
And
Yes.
sometimes we don't know how we're contributing to the teenager's behavior without someone on the outside with a dispassionate view of what's going on. Maybe the parents modeling that. I know just, in our couples dynamics, uh, I felt like I was the innocent one when I would hear my words reflected back to me by our therapist. I was like, oh, I guess that wasn't very nice. So
Mm-hmm.
she would help me rephrase that in a way that wasn't as accusatory or triggering or some way that was more helpful than the way that we were engaging at the time. So yeah, there, especially if you find yourself in a dead end or a rut, or it's great that you're here and listening to the podcast. But if you find yourself continually repeating the same uh, dynamic and you're not getting anywhere, you really need to see a therapist and get that
Or
worked
get
out.
get some kind of help.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And you can start with you can even pay a therapist to do only parenting
Mhm.
and help because you can go to a parenting class, but sometimes you're not going to have anyone seeing the dynamic. Like you're going to talk and you're going to talk about the dynamic. You're not going to have anyone telling you exactly what to work on with your family. So
And
you
it's
can,
easy to just complain and make your kid the problem, the scapegoat. It's all their fault. But until somebody's actually seeing what's happening and can have that child there and say, well, she does this too. And no, I don't. Then you talk about it and you realize, oh, yeah, I guess I am modeling that behavior.
Yeah. Or if you're seeing your child being incredibly disrespectful, but that's the way your partner talks to you, then you're
Mm,
modeling.
yeah.
You need
Yeah.
to learn to model something more healthy.
Mm, mm,
So it has to be, yes, you create a contract, you create consequences in the contract. That was the next step about the contract I was talking about. But it's not that easy to apply that contract if the family dynamic is already suffering and
yeah.
is contributing to the behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And most teenagers see us as hypocrites anyway. So when they're in this dysfunctional dynamic, they're like, well, you always tell me not to do it, but you tell me not to go out and drink, but you're always out and drinking, or you tell me not to hit the dog, but you slap the you're slapping the my little brother, so they they're going to call you on it, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what's important in the therapy session. Is I guess it's more empowering to the child to speak up about what's really happening in the family, and then you can discuss it and strategize on how to fix it.
And many times you have to work with the parents first
Mhm.
because they're not ready to hear the child say
Very interesting. Yeah, you've been complaining about this child for years, and then suddenly it's my fault?
that.
That's hard to
Yeah.
hear. Yeah.
It's hard to hear, and sometimes they
Mhm.
can't tolerate it yet. So they
Yeah.
have to go through it and understand how it works and learn to communicate better. Because,
Could it be because they feel so disempowered as a parent, they don't wanna lose that power once they're in there in the therapist's office? Or is
yes,
that
for
part?
many parents, they want to look like the strong one and the one in power
Yeah.
and the one in control.
Mhm.
And when they lose that, and some parents, I've struggled with them to get them to understand that it's not, you're going to do it because I'm the parent and you're the child and you have to do it.
Mhm.
It's about, especially not that at that age, is not always the best approach because it creates a lot of resentment
Yeah.
and a lot of anger, especially
Mhm.
with teenagers. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's good to talk to your teen and to
Yeah.
communicate and even to surprise them sometimes and invite them, on Saturday, let's go, you and me, to McDonald's, especially the parent who's having more trouble with that child. It's like, let's go have breakfast together.
Yeah.
Let's go somewhere. Let's have
Mhm.
fun and have one-on-one time.
Yeah.
And that's never a reward. One-on-one time, family time is never a reward. That has to be like, no matter what, you can have it with your child. You're not going to
Okay.
punish them with that because you want to improve the relationship.
Okay. So that should just be a normal habit to
Yeah.
find that bonding time, that special time where you're away from the triggers or the arguments, the things
Yeah.
that you normally um, nag at them about.
Yeah. And so your consequences are going to be the cell phone, the video games, you're going to limit that and you're going to give more time as they deserve it
Hmm.
because those are privileges.
Yeah,
But their
yeah.
time with you as a parent, that's not a
Should
privilege.
yes, that
That
make
should
that
be.
makes sense. I mean, there was one person that I hated disappointing was my uncle because he was always so happy-go-lucky, and when I disappointed him one day, oh my gosh, I was just heartbroken. It was awful.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so
And for you, disappointing was a big deal. That was your consequence. For you was a big deal. Now, for someone in the dark triad, that might
yeah.
not be very powerful.
Mm.
So it
Oh,
depends on where you are.
so
But
that's a clue.
unless it's narcissism, which
Yeah,
is, because they want admiration and they want,
they need that.
yeah, they need that prize.
Yeah,
They need that
yeah.
admiration. But for someone in the dark triad or with those traits who are
Hmm.
developing those traits, you might want to have another approach. But the powerful part about having a very clear contract with the consequences in it is, first of all, is going to give you the consequences without thinking about it.
Hmm.
Sometimes when we're mad, we're going to put worse consequences than when we're in a good mood.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
might be the same behavior, so we're not going to be consistent. If we're in a good mood for something and the child does exactly the same thing that they're going to do when we're in a bad mood, we can give them huge consequences.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you want to have them in writing because that way your mood is not going to influence it.
Good point. That's a
Hmm.
good point. Because as a parent, you're often trying to do it on the fly. Okay, now what do I do about that? That smarting off to me, and you're emotionally triggered. That's not a good time to think about it.
Hmm.
That's smart. That's great.
And especially with these kids that we're talking about, you want to have something more structured. Like
Yeah.
if it's a teenager that does little things here and there, maybe you don't need something so structured. But when you have a kid who has very um I don't want to say very severe, but whose behavioral issues are being red flags and you're worried, you want to have something more structured. So
Okay.
then you write a contract. You write the behavior you're expecting because contracts are positive. Like you say, this is what I expect from you, and you put the behavior there.
Yeah.
Or like, and this is what disrespect means, and you write it down. Their behaviors, the
Okay.
behaviors that you consider disrespectful from them. And when you do this, you're gonna lose your reinforcement, like your privileges,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
cell phone, whatever. When you don't do it, like when you're good with the contract, when you
Hmm.
follow the contract, then you're gonna have your daily reward, who is daily cell phone, 24 hours of cell phone every
Hmm.
time you do this. And you're gonna have, maybe you can use what we call token economy,
Yeah.
which is you can give them a ticket, for example, like
Hmm.
extra tickets every night, and tell them how proud that you are of them or whatever because they got their ticket. And
Hmm.
then with the ticket, as they accumulate them, they can buy things.
Oh,
They can
wow.
give them, they can buy, it doesn't have to be something you spend money on. It can be a
Uh-huh.
privilege, an extra privilege. Like
Like Chuck E.
going,
Cheese.
like, yeah, going to, well, yeah, a teenager, I don't know if Chuck E. Cheese is too.
No, I
But
mean Chuck E. Cheese has that back wall where you
oh,
buy.
yes. Yes,
Yes,
that's token
with your
economy.
tickets. Yeah.
Money is token economy.
Oh,
Like, you
yeah,
tell
that's
me if it
true.
doesn't work. Like,
Yeah.
if they tell
Yeah.
you they're going to give you a bonus, you work
Uh-huh.
harder, right? So if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
tell them every day you do this, I'm going to
Hmm.
give you a ticket. And then after 3 days in a row, for example, if it's a teenager who really struggles with that behavior,
Yeah.
give them 3 days. Like, if they do it for 3 days in a row, you give them a bonus, like
Ah,
maybe two extra tickets or whatever. And then
okay.
if they give it, and if they don't struggle that much with that behavior, then you can say a week, and then you
Yeah.
give them extra. And then you
Mhm.
make a list with them of the
Yeah.
things they want to buy with that. It can be extra permissions, like go to the mall with your friends, or like,
Hmm.
whatever you want, extra time
Yeah.
of video games, or
Okay.
extra hour.
Yeah,
Like,
that makes more sense that you
mhm.
sit down with them and come up with the rewards because, a lot of times as parents, we think we know what they want, but we don't always know what they want, especially with each few months. It seems like their needs and wants change.
You actually have them write down rewards and consequences.
Ah, okay.
And then you decide what you want to use, but you have them be part of it because it's
Okay.
easier for them to like participate in the contract and try harder
Mhm.
if you have them be part of it.
It's
So
more
you
empowering, right?
it's more empowering. And you
Yeah.
want rewards that are easy to get with tickets and rewards
Yeah.
that are harder to get. So you're going to have,
Mm.
it's like a list of prices, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
An ice cream is going to be a couple of tickets, but maybe going in the weekend with their friends for a few hours, that's going to have to be 5 tickets. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have to put prices on them, and then have them, it, you want to have positive things in the contract that are attracted to them, because then that's going to make it more attractive and more interesting
So you're
to a
teaching the
teenager.
boundaries and finance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. So reward system that they have to learn to be patient and maybe hold on to some of those tickets to buy
Mm-hmm.
different things. You're teaching a lot of things all at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
what
great.
about medications? Are what do you think about medications in this situation?
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There has to be a psychological assessment to see what's, if there's anything like any comorbidities. Maybe they're depressed, maybe they're anxious, and it's better to do medication with a psychiatrist who knows what they're doing than them going out and seeking drugs and medicating themselves.
Mhm.
Well, and
So,
I'm saying this as a physician, but when people end up going to the psychiatrist, they come out with a bag of medicines.
yeah,
And that is one of my concerns there. Are there alternatives to treating those comorbidities than with the medicines? I
it
mean,
depends on how intense it is. Like it depends if they're suicidal, if they're having suicidal thoughts, or they're out of control. Sometimes medications with a psychiatrist who has, I personally like psychiatrists who have um, integrative, an integrative approach, which means they can use natural approaches. They check their vitamins, they check they check everything that could be underlying that behavior. Because sometimes, the depression could be associated with vitamin B deficiency or vitamin D deficiency. And so they give them strong doses of those vitamins to stabilize them. And so that I think is good. And those psychiatrists are going to be more open to them getting off the medication as soon as they need to,
Mhm.
versus in other cases they stay on the medication for a long time, which is not ideal.
And you
What
don't want to
about things
play around with those medications because
No.
there's some serious side effects. So you want to make sure your psychologist really isn't,
psychiatrist?
or a psychiatrist isn't a
Yeah.
pill pusher.
What
Yeah.
about things like neurofeedback? Any of these other things? I forget what's the other one is. Transcranial
Yes, the stimulation, transcranial
transcranial
stimulation.
stimulation. Yeah.
Yes. Those I don't have like the rates, especially with the transcranial stimulation. I know it works with depression. There are some psychiatrists that use it. Um, and it can help, but well, it helps with depression, which could be a comorbidity.
Right. A
Also,
comorbidity.
yes, neurofeedback works with ADHD, which can cause these behaviors as well. Because if you have ADHD, if you are extremely impulsive, you can start having these behaviors. So sometimes medications can be helpful to stabilize. I personally try to use also diet. I talk about diet and the foods that can cause inflammation, and those can affect mood and behavior. Like, for example, sugar, very processed foods, certain dyes, all of that can cause behaviors that can be very intense. Also the vitamins, I also talk about vitamins, but they need to do that with a physician sometimes, because many times they need like strong doses of supplements, and that's better to do with a physician. So I just educate them, but I prefer them to go see someone who will support that view. And it would be better if they go, like, if they just do psychiatry. For example, I've met people who have been doing taking medication for 20 years and they never saw a therapist. So
Yeah.
that's going to be, you're just covering the spot and just putting makeup on it and not really addressing.
Unfortunately, a lot of people just don't want to go to a therapist or a counselor. They
Yeah.
just, well, or they can't afford it. That's the other issue. What about things, trying to go down the list of some of the non-drug treatments for the comorbidities, not necessarily for these things, but
Mm.
EMDR? Maybe you can say a thing or two. Is that used in kids, EMDR?
Yes, it is, and it's used for trauma. So that's another kind of therapy that can be that can be very helpful if it's related to trauma. Uh, Therapy too. Like sometimes kids make big changes by having, changes at home in the family dynamic, going to either therapy, parenting classes, and as well as individual therapy. Sometimes parents need to go to therapy too. So,
Yeah, and I think that's important. Sometimes the whole family needs to be
yeah,
in the
in
therapy
therapy.
room.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's a family dynamic thing, and we were talking
yeah.
about that the family dynamics can affect it.
And we're not being judgmental here. We all three of us come from very dysfunctional background, and we've had to relearn how to parent ourselves as well as how to be good parents. So we're not looking down on anybody here. We're huge advocates of therapy. So
Actually, in my training as a therapist, you were required to be in therapy
yeah,
because you cannot know how your patient is feeling if you haven't been there. So
yeah,
we were required to be in therapy for like the whole training,
and
which
that's
was
in
years.
Mexico. That's
That
that's
was
in
in
Mexico,
Mexico.
not
Yeah.
unfortunately here in the U.S. That's not required
Well, some schools
as
do
much.
require it. Some
Oh, they do.
some
Okay.
yeah, some disciplines do.
Hmm.
What about? Do you want to say something about walk therapy?
What I know about book therapy, actually, I used it during the pandemic, because it was better to be in open spaces, and it has an impact similar. Well, first of all, you're in touch with nature because usually you do it outside, and um, and it also has like an effect similar to EMDR because you're causing like
You're
bilateral
lateralizing.
movements. Yes, so you're getting to process more as you're walking as a physical activity. Other things that are important for
How do you
mental health,
spell that?
actually.
How do you spell that for people wanting to look that up?
Walk,
No, no, plaza. What did you say? I'm a layperson. Bilateral.
Yes, you move like both hemispheres because you're moving. As you walk, you're
Uh,
causing stimulation in both sides of your brain.
ah.
So that's like the EMDR, that's what it
Mhm,
causes. Actually, you
mhm,
use a device that vibrates on both sides, like
mhm.
alternatively, to cause
Uh-huh.
rapid eye movements. That's what
Okay.
the EMDR is.
Okay. To rewire
So
the brain
it helps you process trauma. It helps
process.
you
Okay.
process experiences better. And so as you walk and you're talking about it, you're processing as well.
Now, so for people who may be thinking you're getting a bit woo-woo here by connecting with nature, how does that, can you guys explain that to me more in scientific terms? Why is connecting with nature important for your mental health?
Being in touch with nature, there's a lot of research that suggests that being in touch with nature helps with mental health and helps reduce depression. Like
Hmm.
going outside, walking, looking at the trees,
getting
looking at
outdoors.
nature, getting
Yeah.
outdoors. It helps
Yeah.
with depression and with
Hmm.
other mental health conditions.
And sunlight as well. Just the sunlight
Vitamin.
alone. Um,
Raises
it's
your vitamin D, right?
well, not only that, it hits your eyes. You can actually purchase light therapy. These lamps that have 10,000 lux, at least 10,000 lux. That's the amount of light intensity, and you use it first thing in the morning, and you want it to come from the top down because you want it to hit the bottom of your eyes. And that actually helps regulate your circadian rhythm. So, uh, and then we talked about the other thing that we haven't talked about is sleep, proper sleep. So if when teenagers have, they like to stay up late, they like to wake up late, they dysregulate the circadian rhythm, but uh, proper sleep structure and sleep hygiene is what we call it. And you can look up people are listening. They can Google sleep hygiene. That is an important aspect, and for children to learn to do that at an early age.
Not
So
sleeping with their iPhone and
that's actually a good one. The phone needs to be out of their hands about 3 hours before bedtime. Um, and at the very least, you got to turn off the blue light.
Yeah.
And nowadays, if you
Or
go on
use
your
blue light
phone,
blocking glasses at night, 2 hours
Mm,
before bed.
mm. Oh,
right, you can
Hmm.
get those.
Yeah.
But I pretty much in all my devices, I've turned off the blue light. So I don't need the blue light. But that's an important thing. And then the other aspects of sleep hygiene that involve the bedroom. The bed is only for two things. Now, for teenagers, it should be just one thing, right? Because they should not be sexually active, or at least that's my opinion. Um, but the bed should be just for one thing. It's sleeping. Shouldn't be watching TV in bed. Should be reading, well, reading just to fall asleep. Um,
not on their phone.
and then don't lay in bed for more than 20 minutes. If you're not asleep, get up, do something, go back, because then you associate the bed with restlessness. And that's those are some of the things. So those are just some that come off the top of my head, but those are important elements of proper sleep restoration, and having family structure um, helps with that. So if
Mhm.
if the child comes home and there's nobody there, if there's no parents at home and the kid's always alone, they're not going to have a good structure. I do remember one of the Trinity's
She
protesting.
wants to
She
participate.
Is there a
she's
squirrel running around over there?
there's the whatchamacallit, the barn swallows are flying in it. This is the time they get really active. So she's,
Okay, so it's she's getting
yeah,
riled up. That's not good for her
yes,
sleep.
I know.
So so the uh, he would leave the house in the middle of the night, go do cocaine, come back, and at 5 in the morning do his homework. And it's someone that he had been in therapy and all that, and is now a therapist. But that's when he was telling me those stories. Like, who's watching you at home? And it's like, well, no, nobody. That they didn't care what I was doing, etc. So those kind of things are important to have good family structure. Okay, so let's move on. We talked about comorbidities. We talked about what we can do, and I think we're in agreement, Dana, that the best results come if there's a family guided therapy system. So it's not
Hmm.
just treat the child and
Yes.
scapegoat them, it's treat the whole family
Hmm.
as well as the comorbidity. And but people with the dark triad can actually turn out to be pretty functional later on. And we had talked about a few people before, the Tate brothers, which that's someone I would not want to be associated with, but they're seen as competent at least, and they're very
Hmm.
good at what they're doing and within the dark triad, right?
Hmm.
But not exactly what you want your children to grow up to be. Do you have any
Yeah.
comments about the Tate brothers? We're not exactly fans of them, but what did you
You know,
say?
I don't have enough information to like
Okay.
I've heard of it, but I don't have a lot of information of them.
Yeah, I've learned more about them than I want to know. So let's talk about somebody else. But the classical psychopath, and when we were in class, in psychology class, that was pointed out to us back then, was the James Bond characters. So they're classic psychopaths because they don't, license to kill. They're very narcissistic. They're Machiavellian, right? So that's a classic dark triad individual. But they're doing something good, and that defense mechanism that we've talked about before is
Sublimation.
sublimation. Yeah. Do you want to
Hmm.
say something about that?
Sublimation is when you use your tendencies to do something positive and socially acceptable. So, for example, someone with a lot of aggression becomes a surgeon. So you get to
Yeah.
open people, like cut people open. And what's more
Yeah.
aggressive than that? But then you're sublimating it. It's a very advanced and adaptive defense mechanism that we use. And
Right.
and we can turn it into something very productive for society and for us.
Right. So that's one of the positive things is to learn how to sublimate. And as one of the one of the best ways to learn to sublimate is exercise, right? You take your anger and you channel it into something productive. And I'm saying that if kids learn to exercise on a regular basis, make it part of their routine, that can be positive, take their energy out in sports, because that actually helps reduce um, consequences of, all the stuff that we've been talking about is to be in, in structured activities.
Yes. Also, to like having good techniques to manage stress. Like,
Can you talk about some of those?
yes, for example, yoga will help you stretch all those muscles. It has some meditation, breathing exercises, and you can reduce the levels of cortisol and adrenaline. So, yoga can be very helpful for people with mental health conditions. Meditation also. We will live in the future and the past. We're never in the present. We're never like connected to the moment. Using mindfulness can help us strengthen the frontal lobe, reduce the size of the amygdala, which is not needed for certain dark triad characters, but for most people who have anxiety or who have stress, it's very helpful. But you can become more resilient. And remember, these characteristics can be associated with underlying anxiety or depression. So it's good to have those self-care techniques to take care of your mental health. Humor can be also very, very helpful. Actually, sometimes I tell some of my patients who have like a session of laughter a day. There's research that has they have checked their levels of stress before and after a laughing session, and they considerably go down.
Is this like
So
forced laughter, like laughing yoga,
listen to
or
a
is
comedian.
this?
Listen
Oh,
to a
okay.
comedian.
Listen to a comedian. Okay.
Yeah, like 5 minutes a day, just laugh.
Yeah.
Just, use your sense of humor. And
Hopefully
that's actually, that can
not a
become a
dark
very
triad
adaptive. No, 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 not that kind of humor.
comedian.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But that can become a very adaptive defense mechanism also,
Hmm.
using humor.
Yeah. Nice.
So one of the awful dysfunctional things that happened during the pandemic is when comedians were getting canceled.
Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, somewhere along the line, people just lost their sense of humor.
Yeah.
And that luckily that's resurfacing. Um, and I think on that note, on Trinity's comment, let's wrap this up. Any final words, Anna, about that? Where can people find you if they're interested in seeking counseling advice?
My website is mbccounseling.com, and they can find my information there. There's even they can fill a form asking for a consultation, and I'll call them back.
So that's M
So
as in mother, B as in boy, C as in cat.
yes,
Okay. Great.
MBC counseling all together
Yeah.
.com.
Because it almost sounds like NBC, like the news
Yeah, no, it's
networks.
M as in mom. It's
Okay.
actually right down next to my name. Like it's written
Perfect.
down next to my name here.
Perfect.
So
And as I'm always telling my wife and my kids, leave the dad jokes to the professionals. Okay,
That wasn't a dad joke. I was just making
that's
a
why
point.
you should leave it to the
Oh,
professionals.
gosh.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, Anna, and
thank you for
this has
having
been
me.
very enlightening, and
Mhm.
hopefully we'll do this again. And then on another topic, we have to find another topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank
All
you for
right.
having me, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today at Boundaries and Beyond. We would love for you to like and share with all those boundaryless friends and family members out there, as well as subscribe to our podcast. Also, please join us on Instagram at Boundaries Beyond Podcast. See you then.
See you then.